Would you mind maybe sharing a little bit about what it means to hustle and why it's not all glamorous being an investor?
No, it's not. And venture capital can be very lucrative in the long run, but in the short run, it tends to be quite the grind. It takes 10 years plus to start to see the fruits of some of your labor.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work, episode 280. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show. And of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact: Seth Lazar from the Australian National University published a fascinating 5,400-word treatise at aeon.co in which he describes how generative agents will change our society in weird, wonderful, and worrying ways. He hopes to change the narrative by applying the principles of philosophy to AI. This is a very brief summary. I encourage you to read the full essay. Seth says existing generative AI systems are already causing real harm. Future generative agents may be dangerous enough to warrant at least some of the fears of looming AI catastrophe. Between these two extremes, the novel capabilities of the most advanced AI systems will enable a genre of generative agents that's either literally unprecedented or else has been achieved only in a piecemeal, inadequate way before. These new kinds of agents bring new urgency to previously neglected philosophical questions. We lack adequate moral and political theories with which to evaluate them. Just as we've become comfortable discussing new frontier AI models, we should get equally comfortable discussing frontier AI ethics. As frequent listeners know, this is a passion topic for me. We've had a lot of amazing guests discuss the ethics and the philosophical implications of AI. As always, we will link to the full article in today's show notes. Now, shifting to today's conversation, Allison Baum Gates has spent more than a decade in and around the future of work. As an employee, investor, and author, her popular book, Breaking into Venture, is a refreshingly human look at how to and how not to succeed in venture capital. As a general partner at early stage venture fund Semper Virens, Allison invests in technology transforming workforce, healthcare, and financial services. She's also a contributing writer for Forbes, a guest lecturer at Columbia's Business School and UC Berkeley, Haas, and the author of the book I previously mentioned. Prior to joining Semper Virens, Allison worked on the trading floor at Goldman Sachs, was an early employee at General Assembly, co-founded Fresco Capital, a global seed fund, and was an investor at Trinity Ventures. Allison holds a BA in Econ with honors and a minor in film studies with a language citation in French from Harvard. And without further ado, Allison, it is my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about your background and how you got into this space.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm already learning a lot from our conversation, and you've done a great job of summarizing my resume. I can give a little bit of a more personal touch on how I ended up sort of obsessing over this question of what does the future of work look like. I grew up in the Midwest watching both of my parents' jobs being disrupted by technology. My dad was an architect. My mom was a graphic designer. And I saw the stress and challenges and also opportunities that came along with that. And from a very young age was very dedicated to making sure it never happened to me. Real original, I know, not wanting to be your parents, but we all at least start out that way. And so worked really hard, obviously, went to a great college and got a great job on the trading floor and thought, okay, I'm set. And then the financial crisis happened. And when that happened, combination of everything going on, a lot of jobs, particularly in the securities division, were being replaced by algorithms. And I thought, wow, I'm 21 years old. I just spent my entire life like trying to avoid this situation. I'm coming from a place of privilege, and somehow it's already happening to me. So this is going to be a really big problem for everybody. And I wanted to be one of the people to solve it instead of contributing to the issue. And so that's when I decided to focus my career in technology. I joined General Assembly as a venture-backed startup training professionals in digital skills that were in demand from employers. And then through that process of being an early employee at a venture-backed startup, got introduced to the venture capital world. And it's obviously somewhat of a small piece of the overall financial industry, but a highly influential one if we look at the value being created and the scope and scale of the technology that's being backed by VCs. People that don't know about the industry should know about it because we know about you, and we're investing in the technology that's impacting your healthcare, your job, how you date, how you eat, pretty much everything you do. And so that was really the mission of the book, and a big mission for me, as well as just educating more people about how venture capital works, since it's going to have such a big impact on our lives and our livelihoods.
As I talk to venture investors on this show, one of the themes that tends to come out is that just as entrepreneurs, we know what it means to hustle, to build a startup. But a lot of entrepreneurs don't appreciate what it means to hustle as an investor. And in your book, there's just this fascinating human raw anecdote about you and the story behind Fresco. Would you mind maybe sharing a little bit about what it means to hustle and why it's not all glamorous being an investor?
No, it's not. And venture capital can be very lucrative in the long run, but in the short run, it tends to be quite the grind. It takes 10 years plus to start to see the fruits of some of your labor, which is taxing, obviously, from a financial standpoint, but also from a personal standpoint, because you spend a lot of your time wondering if you're actually any good at this. And I don't know, even after 12 years of doing this, I still ask myself that every day. But it was interesting. I really was excited about getting into venture because, especially being an early employee at a VC-backed company, you saw how you might think that your CEO is making all of the decisions, but ultimately they're actually answering to their board, which is typically comprised of their VC investors. And so I was watching how our venture investors were impacting the decisions that we made, the strategies we pursued, the ways that we define success. And after building a network of angel investors and learning more about the venture industry, I was really intent on getting onto that side of the table. I wanted to be, there's this theme in my career over and over is I don't want to be told what to do, basically. I want to be the one telling people what to do, but I would rather be the disruptor than the disrupted. And so when I joined my partner at the time to build Fresco, we weren't life partners, we were business partners. I guess people use that term differently. I have to always clarify that because I forget. But my co-founder at Fresco, and we set out to start the fund, I had this expectation that on day one, you were going to have this flood of pitches coming in and you've got money. And so everybody's going to be asking you for the money. And what I quickly realized is that was not the case. I learned about this concept of deal flow, which is that just like any other business, you have to build a funnel of potential opportunities. And that definitely doesn't come to you. And in fact, there's this idea of adverse selection that if you're a new VC and a company is coming to pitch you, you should probably be asking yourself why. And so I had to figure out how to go out and find those opportunities for myself. And that was definitely a rude awakening and something that, we still do today. Spend a lot of time out there actively sourcing potential opportunities, knowing that often the best opportunities are the ones that you seek out and not the ones that come to you.
It's so hard to bootstrap a new fund. There's so many emerging fund managers out there. What's been your secret to raising even your maiden fund? I know Semper Virens had a ton of progress and you've been a big part of it, but what was it like going from 0 to 1?
Exhausting, for sure. Definitely hard to get off the ground. And as a relative outsider to the industry, I was living in Hong Kong at the time and then moved to Tokyo. We were investing globally. I think the way that I was able to grind my way into some semblance of success was really around figuring out how to build a powerful network and how to take advantage of that network and how to differentiate yourself. And in the book, I talk about a little bit the science of this, right? How do you build and activate a network? How do you make yourself unforgettable? And how do you add value or differentiate yourself in the market? And at Fresco, we really identified that there were not very many global funds at that time, particularly at the seed stage. And so my strategy has always been focusing on what isn't being done. And we take a similar approach with Semper Virens in terms of our, sector focus on workforce healthcare and fintech, and our very concrete way of adding value through our ecosystem through commercial acceleration. And so the only way to really stand out, even though you feel like as an investor, you shouldn't have to do that work because you have the capital and everybody needs the capital. No, it's actually just as competitive. And the question is, what is your unique value add and what is your unique edge? So there's a whole chapter in the book about doubling down on what makes you different. And, that's relevant in venture, but it's also relevant for any role. It's tempting to see people that have come before you and try to emulate them. But at the end of the day, it's actually the ways in which you distinguish yourself from those who have come before you that will help you succeed, particularly as an outsider.
You and I share a similar thesis about the future of work. And at Semper Virens, that is really the whole, as you mentioned, the founding vision of the fund. You recently published your predictions for AI and the future of work in 2024. And one of them is that through the balance of this year, incumbents will dominate because enterprises have concerns about the ethics and privacy of AI. Given that's the thesis, and there's certainly a lot of data to back that up, where are there opportunities for AI first startups in 2020 to tackle this emerging market, given that they don't have any unfair advantages like compute or data or storage or any of the things that make sense?
It is definitely a really interesting time in the market as everybody is excited about AI and clamoring for AI solutions, but nobody really understands, to your point when you kicked off the podcast, what it means long term and how it might impact us. And what we find and what I've found in our conversations with our network of hundreds of CHR is that when it comes to the people function, they're particularly sensitive to data protection, privacy, security. And while when we talk to CHROs and they're interested in figuring out how to create more efficiency, how to take advantage of this new technology, they're very cautious on how it's being used, how it could be misused. If you're the CHRO of a Fortune 500 company and something goes wrong, it's in the newspaper. And they see that as an existential risk. So I would say HR in particular, we're finding is somewhat slow to adopt. But where I think there's a lot of excitement is around, allowing startups to innovate and find new applications of AI. One thing that really amazes me is when we think about a technological competitive edge, I don't know how any startup is going to be able to build a fundamental AI that's better than what OpenAI has created or what Google's doing or what Anthropic's doing, just because of the size and scale and scope of their resources. But there are so many venture investments and venture investors like ourselves, they're not necessarily deep technology investors anyway. It's more about how do you create an innovative use case for that technology. And while we like to think, sure, yeah, everybody's just using ChatGPT, a lot of people don't use ChatGPT in the course of their everyday life. And so even if something is built on an open source tool, it can still feel like magic. And so I think bringing AI into, not just the early adopters, but into the enterprise and helping people start to feel more comfortable and understand how to leverage it for their own efficacy is a really big opportunity for startups. But that requires being hyper focused on who is your user and really understanding how they operate, what they're looking for, and what their power is within the organization. So I think it's very optimistic for usage, for innovation. Might be a little bit more difficult from a business model standpoint, but the way all of these waves of technology work is you need consumers to lead the way. And so you're going to have to rely on individual advocates, whether it's within an organization or it's an individual freelancer. I see a lot for like kind of the gig economy So that's where we're spending a lot of time in this current environment.
Allison, I feel like the AI theme that dominated last year was what I'll call discovery. Like just this like global process of hyperventilating over seeing a bot write haikus about cats. That was novel, and they almost seemed sentient, and they were silly. And I believe the theme of 2024 is more operationalizing it. Like now we realize someone's got to pay for it, and we're beyond haikus. To the extent you believe in the arc of that narrative, what will the AI theme be that dominates 2025?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think is that a word? Oh, okay. That's a mouthful. Probably won't use that one again. But I think that's a great way of putting it. I am a big believer that we're not going to see AI or generative AI in particular replace entire jobs anytime soon, but instead a portion of every job. And so I would argue the theme of 2025, and we're starting to see it in 2024, is really a shift in mindset where people start to really understand tasks versus jobs. And that's something that early adopters, particularly in the HR space, have been talking about for a really long time. How do we become a skills-based organization? How do we think about breaking things down outside of just a job description? But I think individuals will have to do that for themselves as well. And so I would see that theme bleeding into 2025. Probably 2024 is the laying the groundwork. Let's start to think about tasks in a more concrete way and put the tools in place to measure who has what skills to do what kind of tasks. And then 2025 will be when some of those shifts start actually happening and we start seeing productivity go up in a really meaningful way as people start to automate more tasks and a larger percentage of the job that they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
We talk a lot on this show about the theme of responsible AI. It's a hard definition. It's a hard term to pin down, but we had a great recent guest on the show, Navrina Singh, who's the founder of a company called Credo AI. And I thought she was the most articulate person I've ever met she's actually productizing responsible AI. Would love to know from the seat that you sit in, amazing company, by the way, Credo, from the seat that you sit in, what is responsible AI and how do we take it to market in a way that's not just, a thesis or something vaguely academic. It's actually something that gets embedded into the kind of fabric of operationalizing AI.
It's interesting because I just finished reading a book called Outlive. And, the author talks about how this concept of do no harm in medicine has been somewhat perverted. And that, yes, doctors take this Hippocratic oath, but actually Hippocrates never said that. And it was in part of a larger context. And that essentially, when we approach a situation saying we want to do no harm, we miss opportunities to create longer term, better outcomes, even if the short term impact is negative. So to me, I think we want to avoid that, having that same trap in AI where we're so afraid of making mistakes that we aren't thinking big and we're not trying things. So I think of responsible AI more as a process for how do you make sure that you're testing and innovating on a limited scope where you can identify some of the potential problem areas. Because when you're dealing with a new technology like this, we just can't imagine all of the potential implications of what could go wrong. And so you have to put it into practice or else you'll never be able to discover them and mitigate them. But how do we create an iterative process that allows us to discover those things and then build around them and protect ourselves from them? So to me, responsible AI is actually less about the technology itself and more about the process of implementing it and adapting over time. And, the concept of agile organizations has been around for a really long time, but I think the speed of change will only continue to accelerate because we will be forced to create a responsible AI framework for testing something new. I always think back to this trivia question of what is the greatest invention of all time, and people say like fire or wheels or something, but the answer I always found most compelling was the scientific process because it's the process that has allowed us to discover everything else. And so I think we're in a similar position right now where if we create that right process, it can lead to really amazing things.
Awesome. I'm going to play that back to my kids when they don't want to do their science homework, okay? So you see some of the most fascinating HR tech pitches. And I'm curious, given that answer about what responsible AI is, certainly when we think about using AI in HR, I believe there's no field that can benefit more or risk doing harm to humans if we don't use or exercise AI responsibly. How do you, as an investor, how do you think about when you evaluate companies, how seriously they take implementing or exercising AI responsibly?
Well, I think it's an interesting question because there's the role of the startup and then there's the role of the implementer. And I do think a lot of the responsibility falls on the implementer because startups are innovators and they're supposed to be pushing boundaries and changing the conversation. And we look for founder market fit when we make an investment. And to us, what that means is, does this founder have experience selling into the end customer they're targeting? So you absolutely need a founder that understands how the implementer is thinking and can speak to and build for their questions and concerns. But at the end of the day, I think it's really, you have to have that yin and yang in order to really make progress. So it's just making sure that they can think differently, but speak the same language, if that makes sense.
So one of the interesting threads when it comes to HR and the intersection of AI and HR is proponents of the technology will say, you know what, the HR process is littered with human bias. And if we can actually standardize how decisions are made in an automated way using hopefully clean data to train AI, that will actually mitigate the impact of real human bias that existed before we used AI. And then, of course, there's another, equally compelling argument that says, well, all we're doing is replicating human bias when we encode human bias in AI, and it's just going to perpetuate what already exists. Where do you sit on that spectrum?
Probably somewhere in the middle. I think I completely agree that so much bias in our decision making is so deeply embedded that we just can't see it. And so I don't think there's really any clean data. It's all tainted by whatever the framework or decision making process or the people involved have been historically. But what is really exciting about technology is that it can highlight some of those trends and patterns that have previously been invisible, allowing us to then iterate in a better way. Something simple, I was just testing an AI co-pilot that did some work. It's a very simple technology, so by no means necessarily generative AI dependent, but it counts on your video calls, how many words per minute you speak, and what percentage of the meeting each person speaks. And so we had a moment with my partners the other day where one of them was like, wow, I guess I talk a lot. And, there's things like that where it's just there are not people that are able to speak up in meetings or they're not able to participate. And nobody is doing that intentionally. They don't think about it. It's the reality. If you trained on that data, it would be perpetuated. But the fact that we're highlighting that discrepancy exists then allows us to approach it differently in the future. So I think it's a yes and.
So you alluded earlier to the fact that you and I, by the way, as well, believe that AI will not eliminate jobs, it will augment them. So I think it was Sam Altman who said something to the effect of, AI is great at doing tasks, it doesn't do jobs.
Yeah.
So extrapolate that one out for me. Let's say you're talking to a lot of kids in high school or college who are thinking about, what are the skills that they should be investing in that will allow them best to partner with AI and not see it as an antagonistic force in the workplace that they're entering. What would you coach them to learn now that you think would future-proof their careers?
Two things. One is just an attitude and a culture and mindset of trying new things and being okay failing. I certainly was lucky enough to grow up with somewhat of that mentality, but living abroad was something that really ingrained that deeply into my soul, where if you're living in Hong Kong or you're living in Japan, you're trying to interact with people that are different than you. You're trying to navigate a completely different culture. You can never be perfect and you're going to screw up. And so I just had to get that. I like to refer to myself as a recovering perfectionist. You have to be okay with just saying the wrong thing and forgetting to push your chair in or offending somebody. And that was really good training for me because I had spent my entire life trying really hard to get it right. And I think that prevented me from trying new things in a lot of ways. So the more that an individual can cultivate that kind of mindset, they'll be set up for success, for experimentation, embracing new things. And the second was actually the reason why I wrote my book in so many ways is because I believe that, venture capitalists are investing in technology, and we have a certain approach to building a portfolio, taking risks, expecting a large amount of that portfolio to go to zero. And the book is really designed to talk about how to find success in this world of abundance. And that requires three things. It's figuring out how to access the best opportunities. How do you analyze them efficiently and effectively so that you can decide which ones to pursue? And then once they're in front of you, how do you add value to ensure that you and they are going to be successful? Because that also contributes to your ability to then access great opportunities in the future. And as jobs become slimmer and tasks become automated, everybody is going to have to build a portfolio career. My fundamental thesis is that the future of work is digital, distributed, and data-driven. And when I talk about distributed, it's over space and also over time. And that means that you're going to have multiple things going at once. And so how do you cultivate this portfolio mindset? How do you learn to think like a venture capitalist? I think that's really critical, no matter what line of work you end up going into.
Really good advice. So you see hundreds of future of work pitches. I want you to regale us with a tale of one that stands out in your mind as being like either mind-blowing or like comical, like the one that like you just left like scratching your head being like, I don't know what I just saw, but they're either going to be public enemy number one or they're going to change the world. What's the first one that jumps to mind?
Oh, well, oh gosh, that one is really hard because there are so many that are so good and there are so many that are so entertaining, but I also take it very seriously that we have such a different context than people that are pitching us, right? We see so many. And so I meet a lot of founders that spend a lot of time trying to convince me that the future of work is going to look a certain way that I already agree with. And that is always, to me, a little bit comical because it's know your audience. Like, I'm already there. Let's dig into the details for sure. So I had one of those the other day where I'm like, you're preaching to the choir, you're preaching to the choir, you're preaching to the choir. That really stands out. I think what's so interesting about venture in just the future of work in general is, for the most part, people don't really, I think we're all in agreement around what the future of work will look like. Insofar as it will be technology dependent, it will be different. There are new jobs being created. Things are getting automated. Like, nobody will disagree with that. But I do think where the challenge comes is understanding the timing for when those things happen. And so that's something I always look for is alignment, both in terms of like business development and are you hitting the cycle at the right time? But also, are we on the same time scale in terms of our beliefs around when these things will happen? And so that's something I think about a lot.
We're bad out of time, but I'm not letting you off the hot seat without answering one last question for me. So I want you to roll back the clock. So what's your advice to that newly minted Harvard grad who was on the trading floor at Goldman Sachs, the experienced Allison today? What are you coaching that kid to do?
I think the advice I would really give myself at that age is that the possibilities are limitless. I was very focused on a certain path and a certain definition of success. And technology and entrepreneurship were not really a big topic when I was in college, and it hadn't ever really occurred to me that was a career path that you could chart for yourself. I think I was like so busy looking at the menu of here are the careers that you can have and trying to figure out which one to pick that I didn't fully appreciate that I could completely just throw the menu out the window and order whatever I wanted. And, obviously that takes a lot of hard work and it's a lot more challenging to figure out how to chart a path in new waters, but I don't know how or why that just never really entered my brain. So I would push myself to be thinking in 3 dimensions rather than 2.
Well, so far you've done a good job of picking a career path that has not been easily automated by a bot. So congrats on
some parts of it.
Excellent. Well,
thank you.
Yeah, the book is Breaking into Venture. And Allison, this has been such a pleasure. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me.
And where can the audience learn more about you and the great work you're doing?
Please look us up, Semper Virens Venture Capital. You'll find more about our portfolio and our team and our ecosystem there. And then you can read more about me and the things that I've written at allison.com.
Brilliant. Well, that's all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Rain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.